powerful thing.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. We're live on Facebook. Welcome, everybody. I'm with Mark Phillips again. Mark coming live from France. And today, it's a great honor. One of my closest friends, one of the reasons that I'm living in America today, and you know, just one of the better looking fellas in the world. We have Mike Baer coming to us live from Hendersonville, North Carolina. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Jono. Mark, good to see you guys.
Yeah. So the reason, and so I met Mike in Sydney. We always joke about how I saved him from a madman and a glass of Foster's, and
it's true.
Turns out it's true. And so Mike and I became mates right off the bat. You know, we always laugh. You know, if you can talk about religion, politics, and parenting styles and still smile at someone, then and agree a little bit even, then you must be mates, right? Yeah. And so Mike and I have shared a journey now for about 11 years. I think it is, Mike, 10 or 11 years.
Right.
Yeah. So I met him at a conference in Sydney that I was one of the organizers of. And so I've been over here working with Mike in the leadership space. But Mike also has a real passion going way back in terms of starting businesses and for a corporate guy, which you probably hate to be called now, well, ex-corporate guy, he has an amazing entrepreneurial spirit and an understanding of entrepreneurship. Mike, I was watching a video that you and I cut at Anna Bay, which I'll put onto Business in Bare Feet at some stage. But it was a video we cut before I moved here. And it was just, I just said, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? And I'm going to ask you this question again. You went into what the actual definition of an entrepreneur is. And funnily enough, we got Mark in France because it's derivative of a Latin and a French word. And so anyway, Mike, welcome. Just share a bit of your story and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, and thanks for calling me an ex-corporate guy. There's a story there. So I'm in
trouble.
So from Atlanta originally, Southeast U.S., one of the major cities here, and but really grew up all over the southern United States, and went to, you'll love this, went to 5 different universities before I graduated, and then on to grad school, and all through that time I was involved in business. That's kind of the real story. People ask me, what was your first business? And it was selling flower seeds door to door when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
I needed to make some money, right? And so I came up with that idea. And I've literally, over the last, gosh, that would be 56 years ago, over all these years, I've always had a hand in starting up businesses. Sometimes I've totally been devoted to starting up businesses, and sometimes I've started up businesses as a side hustle, but I always have loved the space of starting up things. My journey into corporate America came really, I had a client in the staffing space, the employment space, that great company. I'd worked with them when they were starting. And after 10 years of consulting with them, they asked me to come in, and I agreed to come in full time to help them build out culture and their leadership academy, and really to bring an entrepreneurial spirit to the now quite rapidly growing company. Just retired from that in May, and have since then reignited a side hustle, Third Path Initiative, and also gone barely back to my roots of startup and leadership coaching it's just called MikeBaer.co. So anyway, it's a short version of it. And I have to say thank you publicly, since we're live streaming, and also I guess this is being taped, but I do have to say thank you, Jonathan Kids, about saving me from a madman in Foster's. But actually, for those of you from Australia, you'll appreciate this. I got trapped in a conversation in a Chinese restaurant in Sydney where a guy, he was so close to me and so in my face in a nice way that I thought he was going to propose any minute. It's really getting dramatic. And so Jonathan managed to intervene and actually interpose himself physically to get me out of that. So I feel like, it's one of those life debts.
Yeah, that's right. Life debt. I like it. Yeah, but it was a good Chinese feed, and we didn't have any Fosters. So.
No, we did not. I was a classic American coming to Oz and saying, could the commercials, right? Foster's, it's Australian for beer. And so I went and ordered a Foster, and the waiter said, no.
Good on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike, apart from Antarctica, I guess we'll develop some business models for that continent. But you've been on every continent.
Correct.
Yep. Yep. So you may be close to outstripping Mark in terms of how many countries you've been to. You're up to 100 and something now, Mark. So
about 102, 103, I think.
103.
Yeah, no, Mark wins the bet on that one. I've been to about 65 countries, but
yeah,
many of those, over and over and over again.
It's a fair number.
Yeah, no, it was good, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a fun run.
So one of the areas that obviously, Mark and I always joke about, our favorite country in the world is Kazakhstan. Yeah. And so, but the funny thing is one of the reasons we really connected in the end too was that, you had been to that part of the world and I had been to Kazakhstan. It was like one of those places when you find someone who's been to a country like Kazakhstan, you can talk for hours, right? Yeah. Even if it's you're only there for 5 minutes, you're landed at the airport. Right? Yeah. And I've been to Moscow airport, right? So that's my trip to Russia. And so tell me a bit about so that's a fascinating part of the world, because living in the US and probably even parts of Europe as well, as soon as you tack Stan onto the end of the country, or An, any kind of An, right? Which really just means land in the Turkic culture.
Yeah, correct.
The assumption is it's terrorist, it's not friendly, it's probably desert, everything's going to kill you, mainly the people, or they're all descended from Genghis Khan and haven't changed a bit. Yeah. What was your experience with that part of the world in particular?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you right off the bat, it was the exact opposite of what you just described. I mean, because you've been there, and I think, Mark, you've been there as well, that part of the world. My first foray, other than Moscow airport, was into the former Soviet Union, was into Kyrgyzstan, which is just south of Kazakhstan. Tiny little hamlet of a country, land of the Kyrgyz, or place of the Kyrgyz, and fell in love with it instantly. They were the most gracious, generous, giving, helpful, protective people you could ever have been around. I went there as a business person, not as a tourist. I went there to actually teach at the State Medical Institute. Ironically, they were trying to de-socialize their medical system after the Soviet Union, and so they asked me to come over and teach the business side of medicine. So I did, and made instant friends. I've got, in fact, my interpreter for my very first trip is like a son to me now. His name is Ibek, and he and I still remain very, very close and wonderful. So beautiful country, beautiful part of the world. The mountains they call it the Asian Alps. They're absolutely magnificent.
Yeah.
The food, not so much. Unless you like shashlik, which is basically a shish kebab sort of thing, and that's excellent.
Oh yeah.
But as far as a place to go, the beauty, the people, the hospitality, and this is a part of the world where, and you guys have seen this because you've been there, they don't have a lot. And when I first started going there in the early 90s, they were living in dire poverty, but they would lay a spread out. Oh, yeah. Have you over for tea, and they would put everything they owned on that table to share with you.
Yep.
And it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. I haven't been there in about 10 years, but I'd love to go back.
Yeah. So Mark has been to Kyrgyzstan to rescue a guy who crashed his motorbike. Mark, could just very quickly share that story, man, because it's and then
it's something like that. I was in Europe doing a little bit of business just before a decent holiday about 6 years ago. Mate calls me up and said, "Listen, my good friend has just broken his wrist, but he was supposed to go to Kyrgyzstan and bring my motorbike."
Yeah, Mark, you have to do something about your internet, dude. We lost him.
For a long time.
We lost you, Mark, just for a minute.
Yeah. Go back to the motorbike.
Go back to the motorbike.
See if I can move around a little bit more and get some better reception.
Yeah.
We are also having
He's up in the French Alps. The internet's a bit slow. So don't feel too sorry for him. Yeah.
In Kyrgyzstan, on the border with China. And my mate Perry didn't know that it was actually a dream, that my house was littered with books about the Silk Road. And of course, the Silk Road trading route is the center of business and commerce and communication for many, many centuries. So as a business guy, to me, this was just fascinating. So I flew
to Kyrgyzstan, which is what he's telling you right
Picked up
now.
this motorbike, explored all the way through Kazakhstan, all the other stands up through Russia, and made it back to Barcelona a couple of months later.
How much fun could that be?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a huge.
And as you say, you're on the Silk Road, which basically was the global trade route in the Marco Polo era.
And is reigniting today, right?
Exactly.
As land travel is becoming more popular, the Chinese, as part of their Belt and Road Initiative, they're actually making sure there's a 4-lane highway all the way from Shanghai to Amsterdam. Yeah. And I went on a tiny piece of it in Almaty in Kazakhstan, which was yet to be paved, but it was 4 lanes. But yeah, it's quite fascinating. Which the reason I thought that story was a really fun one to sort of open up with, and obviously hearing a bit about your, how you end up in certain countries that you kind of either don't expect to, and then they really dramatically surprise you. But it's actually not about any of those, because any country can be wonderful and surprising and a terrific experience, right? No matter where you go.
I've never been anywhere in the world and this is a true statement, that I did not like. I'll hear people say, I don't like such and such, I don't like this country, I don't like that country. And I can tell you truthfully, I've never been anywhere that I felt that way. I've been to some poor, dark, rough places, but I've always found something to enjoy. And usually it starts with the people. Yeah.
And it's often on reflection too. I mean, obviously, in some places you can suffer culture shock earlier than others, particularly, in some of these countries. But I guess where I'm trying to tie it back to is that there's that openness to experiences. And there's even in a country where you say, okay, there's so many reasons why this place is a dump. But at the same time, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to appreciate it. I'm going to love it. I'm going to experience it. I'm going to get myself out amongst it.
Great people.
Yeah,
not
just Kyrgyzstan or not just Kazakhstan. I mean, they are amazing people there. But anyway, and I'm sure every country you pass through, Mark, you've now done 103 countries, and everyone has those experiences. And so, we made friends. We started doing business with some of those travel agents and people we met. We started throwing some money their way. Started giving a service, introducing. Yeah, they're the ones I booked a flight.
And this is how
on me. So,
and I think what you're describing too is it has everything to do with attitude. If you go in with a critical attitude, you're going to see what you're looking for.
Yeah.
If you go in with an open heart, open mind, and little bit of humility goes a long, long way in cultural connection. And then all of a sudden you start learning and you start seeing. You just said it, Mark. You start seeing similarities. Like what I discovered very quickly is these people that I was brought up to believe were sitting by their gun waiting to be, sent over to kill me or to launch a bomb on my house or something. All I really wanted was to raise their kids the way I wanted to raise my kids.
Yes.
And all of a sudden we found all these wonderful connections. So I think you found what you look for. I think you found what you take in with you to pull a cheesy line out of the Star Wars series.
Well, and that's a great discussion in terms of, when you think about, well, what is an entrepreneur and what is what makes a successful entrepreneur? I think there is that need, that openness. There's that need to be wanting to discover, to wanting to try, to wanting to have, or at least, even if you don't want to have new experiences, be open to them.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I remember we sat down, as I said, at Anna Baer a bunch of years ago, and I said, so what does it take to be a great entrepreneur? And you started off, you answered the question, but you started off saying, well, let's go back to what the root definition of entrepreneur. Mike's a smart guy for our listeners out there.
Before I have to add one piece of color here before we go there. So when Jonathan talks about having this video we did at Anna Baer, it wasn't really Anna Baer, it was at his office.
Oh, yes, it was the Australian headquarters at Berube Beach. Yeah.
Berube Beach. And so we're overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and this massive, just beautiful beach. And so I was quite inspired and probably babbled way beyond the norm.
I had to put you back to the beach. I remember that. You were looking inland. So. Mark's
So what we did, I mean, I guess I remember that conversation, we threw out the word itself, entrepreneur, which if you strip away the etymology of it, it comes down to, it means undertaker, one who undertakes, one who does things. And I think the term undertaker in English has a totally different meaning. But if you think about the difference between a dreamer and an entrepreneur is action, right? The entrepreneur doesn't just dream. And by the way, they don't always have to dream up something that didn't exist before. They just have a concept or have an idea, and it could be something as simple as a new location for an ice cream shop. That could be very entrepreneurial if they do it, right? If they actually undertake it. And that's the difference. Honestly, when I look at most of the corporate types in the world, they all have dreams, but they don't do anything with it. They are so locked into the paycheck, the benefits, the sort of risk aversion that governs so much of life. They just don't step out. And so to me, I always think in the New Testament, I think about Peter, when Jesus said, come on, walk on the water. Come out. And Peter not stepped out, that story wouldn't have unfolded. And so that to me is one of the key elements of an entrepreneur. They actually are willing to step out.
Yeah.
And if you don't step out, well, let me add this too. I do believe that true entrepreneurialism is a very minority trait in human population. I think it's somewhere between 10 to 15% of the world population. And I'm probably being generous when I say that. So this is not for everyone. And it's not a good guy, bad guy. It's just, you need to operate from your strengths. You need to operate from your heart. And if your heart is entrepreneurial, then step out, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, that whole action piece. So what is it you think that, what's the gap between somebody being a dreamer and somebody taking action on something, apart from physically taking action? But what do you think are the disconnects there?
Yeah. So, gosh, that's such a complex question. Let me see if I can throw out a couple of simple
questions, Mike. I may.
It's not the question, Jono. It's what you do with it.
It's it. Yeah. We got our first Castle reference in for the day.
There you go. We're scoring one. So I think some of it. I mean, first of all, you got to look at the fear factor, right? And entrepreneurs know fear, so it's not like they're fearless. In fact, the difference between fear and courage is my second point, and it's choice. If you're fearful, that doesn't mean you don't act. It's the choice to act in spite of fear. Yeah. That's my definition of courage, by the way.
Yeah.
You ask somebody in the military on the front lines, are you afraid? And they say no, they're lying or they're an idiot. Yeah. The truth is, fear is real, but an entrepreneur says, I'm going to step out anyway. I'm going to act anyway. I'm going to choose. I think it starts with choice. I think there's a certain level of faith, and that can be a spiritual faith. That can be a faith in yourself. I mean, there's a certain level of confidence that says, I'm going to do this. I think passion has a lot to do with it. I think that's one of the things that when I see people wanting to start their own business, but they don't act, a lot of times it's just lack of passion. It's lack of fire in the belly, as we say. And so I think there's that factor. There's also a lot of misconceptions that I think hold people back. And one of those is we think you have to be Elon Musk to be an entrepreneur, and you don't, right? I mean, you don't have to be Henry Ford. You don't have to be Elon Musk. You don't have to be Steve Jobs. I mean, you can be 100% what you are. Just take your idea and do something with it. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
It's a very active concept.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because, oh, sorry, Mark, go.
So it's attitudinal stuff. Nothing Mike talked about was about technique. It wasn't that you had to be a great accountant or a machinist or something like that. It's attitudes. It's the energy that drives and moving. So it's constantly, and this is this entrepreneurial thing. Anybody with those right sort of attitudes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, it was one of the things, Mike, I noticed, in our, our time working together, and I was obviously with you at that staffing firm, but seeing the number of people in there who were, you talk a bit about some of your business pursuits and things like that, and they're like, oh, I'd love to do something like that one day, or I'd love to do this. I mean, I saw it a lot. Like a friend of mine, when we moved to America, he said, oh, I wish we could do something like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, we basically, you and I had a walk on the beach, our romantic walk in the sunset, and 3 months later, we moved to America. And so, you know, we sold our house, we burned the barns, we did, you know, did everything. And, but it really is in that action. I mean, we could still be sitting here talking about, man, I must move to America one day. That'd be really cool. Well, probably if I'm looking at America right now, I wouldn't want to move here, but I'm glad I'm here.
Well, and Mark just said something I don't want us to gloss over. And he said, he made the point, it's not about technique or expertise.
Right.
And I think there's another, you know, look, I believe this. I believe we're made in the image of a creative God, and we are all wired to create.
Yep. And
we're wired to be an entrepreneur to a certain degree. And so you got to ask yourself, it's not so much what's not there, it's what's in the way of it, what is there. And if you misconception, like, you know, you have to be a genius or you got to be an expert, or you have to know special secret business handshakes, or, you know, whatever it is that stops you, that's the thing you got to look and say, okay, I'm going to blow that up. You just said it. People say, oh, I wish I could do that. Well, I wish I had hair. But that ended a long time ago. And wishing isn't doing. Wishing is, in fact, wishing is the opposite. But wishing's the opposite, right? I mean, to me, that's it's such a statement of weakness. Oh, I wish I could do what you did. Well, you could. Yeah. You could get on a plane and go to.
Well, and it's funny because obviously, you know, as coaches, that's what we do. Like, as soon as someone says, I wish, it's like, okay, so what would it take you to do that? Oh, well, you know, I've got my parents, or I can't do this, and my kids won't cope, or whatever it might be. And it's like, okay, we ticked all those boxes and everything's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and so let's now talk about what's really holding you back here. And obviously, like a lot of things, like a lot of reasons people don't take action on a lot of stuff, not just
right.
You know,
not just starting a business.
Fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of failure. It was fascinating, you know, like I sat in a room of entrepreneurs. You'll remember some of these guys, Mark, like David Gall and guys like that. And they had a panel, this is back in Canberra. And the very last question that was asked to the panel is, what drives you? And David Gall was the only one who didn't answer this way. The other 5 who were well-known entrepreneurs in Australia said fear of failure.
Yeah.
And I thought, what an awful thing to drive you. And David just said, he says, I love to see the stuff I create come to life and help somebody and add value to someone. And
you know, I become a huge Elon Musk fan, and yeah. not on every level, but as I particularly have watched the guy through the COVID crisis, and he has been in the forefront of new ideas and doing things and stepping out and delivering ventilators to hospitals in California in a week's time.
Yeah.
When the ventilator manufacturers themselves couldn't do that. I mean, there's something about the guy. He sees it, he goes for it, and his joy is the accomplishing of it. He's not afraid of failing. I mean, I watched, and maybe you did too, the whole SpaceX launch and I mean, that felt like something out of a Star Trek movie. Fabulous technology, and yet he wasn't afraid. He was loving every minute of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he's been fascinating in terms of some of his technology, and but that whole doing piece. And so what would you say to people? And I'm sure you yourself, you know, you've gone to countries that you knew nothing about, that you were sort of thinking, oh, I don't know, they're waiting at the airport to shoot me when I arrive because I'm American, or because I look like an American, or whatever. But and I don't know what fears, or whether you're more excited about being in that country. But what were the steps you kind of took to say, okay, from I'm thinking I might do this to I'm actually now literally landing at the airport and about to.
So hold that thought. I've got the lawn crew has just arrived. They always manage to do this whenever I'm recording. Let me go shut the door, at least get some of the noise out of the way.
Okay. So this is live on Facebook, so we're just going to fill in some time while Mike does that. But yeah, what's been amazing in this conversation for me, Mark, is that whole undertaking, the whole doing thing, right? And so we'll just...
You know, you don't need to know all the answers ahead of time. You just need to start. You need to have a go, put one foot down, the next foot will follow, and suddenly you've walked a mile.
And occasionally you trip.
You don't necessarily have to walk. And you get up and you go again.
In my case,
you're still a mile down the track.
Yeah. Anyway, Mark.
Yeah. So, well, no. What Mark just said is exactly what I would have said. I think when I went You know, I went to Kyrgyzstan originally out of a sense of curiosity. I'd always been fascinated by the Soviet Union and how it could exist and so on. So when it began to unravel and I had a chance to go over, I went instantly. I mean, I didn't have to deliberate. I said, let's go, because I was insanely curious. And by the way, I think that's another mark of an entrepreneur, is you're always curious. And when you follow curiosity, that's when, to Mark's point, you take the next step. What's around the corner? What's after the next step? You don't have to have it planned out all the way through. You don't have to know everything about it. And when you do that, and we don't do it often, but when you do that, life is an adventure. It really is a blast, even though it has weird and dangerous times in it. I know one time I landed in Jakarta, Indonesia, in the middle of the 100 Years flood. No phone number for my contact. The airport was cut off from the rest of the city. Long story short, I ended up, finding a four-wheel drive car that will take us to a hotel downtown that I didn't know, just any place we could stay. And my host had called that particular hotel to see if I was there. And so it was just an adventure, right? It was we weren't afraid. We just enjoyed it. And the same thing is true landing in Kyrgyzstan. It was, it was just, that is also, again, we think about starting a business. If you view starting a business as, I must do this to pay my bills, you can do it. You can be very successful, but you won't enjoy it nearly.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, there's going to be a limit to that, because there's only so much fun that delivers, right? Only so much adventure.
So I think adventure and fun is unlimited.
Yeah.
And I think it's there for us to discover and enjoy. And when we do, again, if you ask, Mark, you went here, and I'll talk about my dad for a moment. My dad was the classic military Air Force fighter pilot, came out of World War II, got the 40-year job and a gold watch. And when he retired, literally on a Friday night, that next Monday, he started his own business. And he was so filled with joy and excitement. And I said, Dad, what's going on? Well, why didn't you do this 20 years ago? And he gave the classic, what they now call them the veterans, right? But the classic veteran answer was, well, I had your mother and your sister and you and your brother, life's responsibilities, which he took extremely seriously, had kept him from doing what he really wanted to do. And I told him, I wish you'd done this 20 years ago. Just watching the energy and the joy and the fun that you're having would have made the family a lot more enjoyable. And so, I think that's a piece that we can't leave out of it. If we lose the fun and the sense of adventure and curiosity, I mean, look at Mark. I mean, we tease, but he's gallivanting around the world. He's I love it. He's quarantined in the French Alps. My heart breaks for you, my brother. It just breaks. but that's part of who Mark is. Mark's on adventure.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to rediscover that. Even now in this whole COVID crisis, I think people are living in fear, not adventure.
Yeah. And yet we're poised to do some of the greatest adventures ever. Yeah.
Mark, you started to say something, and we lost you there for a second.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you're exactly right. An Aussie colleague of mine managed to escape from his lockdown country in Bulgaria last week because it was a 2-day window of opportunity to get into Croatia. So he grabbed it with a few mates and boom, off they've gone. They've gone into another country to start exploring, and he's still working along the way. He's still got his clients all around the world. He's just moved country. Yeah. And, he could have got stopped on the border, could have been turned back. No worries, you just deal with it as it happens. Same as business. You just deal with it and move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and John, you were talking about earlier the fear of failure, right? And that's because in the West in particular, I haven't seen this as much in the East. Mark, maybe you can speak to that from your Central Asian experience, but I haven't seen the belief that failure is final. And part of that, I think, is the way they view life. The West views life as a line, right? It's linear.
Yeah.
And if you fail, that line is broken. Whereas in the East, they view life as more of a circle. Whereas if you fail, you just get up and keep going around the circle. And they just don't seem afraid of that. And part of it, I guess, is they lived in such hard circumstances, but maybe their egos are...
Combination. Yeah.
Yeah. And we certainly see that in a lot of developing countries. I've seen a lot of that in Africa where, I even remember our sponsor son, Ronald, we sent him a gift. I don't know, it was like $50 or something, seemed like nothing to us. And he messages back saying he bought 6 pairs of shoes. I was like, he could hardly afford to put food on the table. And we at the time we were confused by it. We never questioned it. We didn't want to discourage him or anything. But when we went over to his wedding and all that sort of thing, we actually asked him about it. And he said, oh yeah, because I could turn that 6 pairs of shoes into 12 pairs of shoes. Mm-hmm. And so just the things he did, he bought these brand new shoes, which allowed him to buy 12 pairs of second-rate shoes, which allowed him to buy, whatever it was. And just the way they trade up, you hear those stories of starting with a paperclip and ending up with a car, Yeah. But it's that activity. So much of what we think is that when we actually sell something, we've actually got to give something away rather than it's actually adding value to somebody else. And that's part of the entrepreneurial mindset. I'm actually adding value to your world, and I understand that, and I want to keep understanding that.
Mike, tell me about your corporate role. You've had the last couple of years, very large organisation. How do you get that sense of adventure and excitement across an organisation that is made up of all sorts of people that are not necessarily entrepreneurs?
It's called Double Diamond.
That's a great question. So just a little background on the company. We became, in the course of my time there, a $3+ billion company, very successful, kind of the envy of the industry. And so we actually had within that, and John, you know this because you were part of it, there was quite the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes.
Because at the time, the original founders were all there. There were 4 or 5 of us who were all a part of that in different roles. I was a consultant, but I was considered part of the team. And so part of it was baked in. I mean, the leadership had that spirit of entrepreneurship. The other thing that was, I think, the brilliance of that company is the culture. Everything that the company did was not about technology. It was not about, it was creative, it was innovative, all of that, but it all flowed from a culture, just a set of beliefs, a cause that drew more out of us than we perhaps wanted to give. And so that to me was the secret sauce. I think we built it on culture, and within that culture was the concept of constant reinvention. So we didn't ever lose that founder mentality. We went through an acid test on that. My role, by the way, was which role, John? They would move me
the thief of the island of misfit toys.
Exactly. So I had so many roles. I finally quit putting titles on my business card because it was just having to be reprinted all the time. But I was that guy that would go wherever I was needed. So I was living the entrepreneurial dream, right? Go fix that, go change that, go start that, go stop that. So for me personally, it was always there. But we had the acid test of our culture when we were forcibly merged with a company twice our size. We had grown to a $1 billion company. They were a $2 billion company. And we had what we refer to as a shotgun wedding, where the owners, if you're equity backed, you don't have a lot of say in when you sell and who you sell to. So we were sold. Our management team took over the larger company, because they were in trouble. So we were immediately charged with doing 2 things. One was changing the business model, and one was bringing them into our culture. And so for the 5 years after that, which really just ended this past February, that was 99% of what I did. My team, we were the apostles of culture, and we did everything possible. John was a part of that team. We did everything possible to.
Oh, it was amazing.
And it worked. That's the beauty of it. I mean, we really did take a very dysfunctional culture filled with good people and bring them into the fold where they began to really drink heavily of the culture, and it made a huge difference. So for me, I don't know, Mark, it's a great question. It almost felt like a startup every day because of that, because, just the task was huge, and it was a big company, but it was still very much, okay, let's take this hill. Let's get out and take action. Let's bring change about. And it was always healthy. That was the other piece of it.
Mm. And I guess less asking for permission, maybe a bit more asking for forgiveness on occasion.
That was one of our mottos.
Company law.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest reasons I think I moved to a place of well, I was ready to move on. You know, we started getting big and acting big and thinking big, and I'm like you. I see something that needs to be done. I'm going to do it. Did I get my rear end chewed off a few times? Yeah, I sure did. But I turned around and do it again because I did what I thought was right at the time. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But yeah, when you get in it, and that's a mind killer, right? The idea that I can't do anything without permission.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's part of what attracts a deeply entrepreneurial person to starting their own business is they really want to do it their way.
Yeah,
and that's a huge drive. It sounds like arrogance, but it's not. They want to do it their way, and they don't mind asking for advice. They just don't want to ask for permission.
Yep. I would expect a whole lot of new entrepreneurs being created over the next year who have just been so frustrated with these lockdowns from the COVID pandemic and the economic. They're just going to break out and do their own thing.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to go back to that lockdown, can't do anything sort of life, and they're going to use this as a chance to change themselves.
I agree. I agree. I think we're going to see a lot of small companies starting. You know, I don't know about the unemployment rate in Australia or France. I know in the U.S. it peaked at about 32 million people that had lost their jobs, and it's moving in the right direction now, thankfully. But I think there are many of those folks who, for whatever reason, were laid off that aren't going back. They're not going back. They're gonna start something. It may be smaller. It may be a coffee shop. It may be a mechanic garage. I mean, whatever it is, they're going to do it, and they're not going to look back. And I love that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, but I think it's also an interesting season in the area that I love, that small to medium space, and for them to realize that heading down the corporate, we call it corporate, but the institutionalized corporate path is not necessarily a smart move. Remaining small and agile, but big enough to be able to have the resources to do stuff. You know, you and I, Mike, have worked with some companies in that kind of 100 million-ish space, which in the US is considered small to medium. In Australia, that's a big company. And so, but it's fascinating particularly when you're working closely with the leadership. They're often still the owners, are still the leaders, and there's that mentality. We want to keep it fresh. We want to keep getting after stuff. We don't quite know how to do it and how to do it well, but we want to do that. And I think there's some really interesting conversations that are a challenge for bigger business going forward.
Well, you know, John, there's a myth inside the big company world that it's secure.
Oh,
and you take that job, and you've got your benefits, and you've got your health care, and you've got this, that, and the other, and you get this very false, very, very deceiving sense of security. And then to Mark's point, something like COVID comes along, and you're out. Yeah. And you realize that there was no security there at all. It was never security. It was there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're going to be there as long as they want you, and not a moment longer.
Yeah.
And so that deals with that sort of, well, maybe I should start my own. Well, at least I can fire myself instead of having somebody else do it.
The rules are all changing. You know, it's the house rules. It doesn't actually matter anymore how you think it through. It's really about the impact, about how the market takes what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's some crazy things going super well at the moment that you would have never thought about. And if you don't get out there and keep trying and experimenting, you're not going to find these gems. Yeah. You're not going to have the fun experimenting and finding people and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's quite amazing the amount of networking and partnerships and things like that are happening with small business right now because they've been online and are forced to sort of reach out around the world.
Absolutely.
So it's a great time.
I will tell you, I wish I was the guy that invented Zoom.
Yeah.
But think about it, right? I mean, this is a good example, but we do these all the time. You guys do them all the time as well. Yeah. You have a conversation that looks like, you know, a checkerboard of heads on your screen, and you're having conversations with people that are sitting in South Africa, France, the US, the UK. I mean, and that level of collaboration, I think, I don't know what's going to come out of that, but I think it's going to breed a whole new wave of innovation and entrepreneurialism.
And it's been around a long time. Just back to that Kazakhstan journey. I was driving through the middle of the desert, coming into a little town in Kazakhstan, and we had to pull over. There was a herd of camels coming down the road, and they were approaching a roundabout, and the cameleer was taking them around the roundabout the wrong way. So we were completely confused how we should get around a mob of camels. So I stopped. I pulled out my camera to my phone to start taking some photographs of this weird situation, and the phone rings. It's my ISP back in Australia, just double checking on my router password because he was setting up my new account for me. I was like, of course you sit there in the middle of Kazakhstan in the hottest camels around you, debugging your internet router on the other side of the world. It's like,
yeah.
Okay.
Well, it is. I'll tell you that the business that we're really revving up, we mentioned earlier, Third Path, but it comes out of something we did years ago, kind of manually, right? We've always been focused on helping people in places like Kyrgyzstan and Indonesia and Kazakhstan start businesses. Jono, you've done it in Central Asia and certainly in Africa. Yep. And so we've been doing that for 30 years. That's what I fell in love with in Kyrgyzstan. I saw the opportunity to help people start businesses. They wanted us because they had to survive. It wasn't even about being creative at the beginning. It was about survival. Well, so we would do it. Our methodology would be getting a team of 8 to 10 guys, fly over there, do a week-long conference, drilling into them, come back 3 months later, do another one, and 3 months later, do another one, and ultimately fund them. And it worked. I mean, literally, we ended up operating in 37 different countries and started several thousand businesses around the world, over $2 million out in investment. But it's not scalable. And so when COVID hit, it's almost like, we actually made the decision to take it all virtual, to put the whole program, the whole concept online, to teach people how to start businesses, to coach them through starting businesses, and to provide them funding. And so we were able to take technology, to your very point, and do something cool with it. We didn't invent the technology, we just took advantage of it.
Yep.
Yeah. I can see we've got Dakar there in the background, Mark.
Yes, as you've seen, I've walked up the hill. I've converted to the phone, walked up the hill to try and get to better reception here. And our chief happiness officer came with us.
That's the dingo.
There's a dingo in France.
Yeah. Look, it's certainly very interesting in terms of, and again, this comes back to this whole undertaking thing about taking action and about the way, what are some of the barriers and the way we actually think through these things, how we see these opportunities, what we see in front of us. And so, it's so important that we have that mindset that's open, that we can actually, be creative. We can see. It's interesting. I was reading an article the other day that talks about one of the challenges, particularly, I would say the younger generation, but I think it's kind of my generation down, not just younger generation, is smart devices and that, things like this mean we're no longer bored. We don't have the time to get bored. And boredom is one of the things, you think you spend a lot of time on the motorbike, right? Yeah. And so there's probably times just on straight road where, the scenery is beautiful, but you might just get a bit bored, right? And that's when you start to think and you start to create. And it's like people suddenly start thinking in the shower. It's because there's not a lot else going on in the shower, And it's interesting though, but the actual tactic of I need to separate myself out so I can actually find that space to be creative. I can open myself up to be able to do these things and to really take that on.
And we've done it for years, Johnny. We haven't worn our shoes too much. We walk around bare feet, and we kick this business off in a tree house near a beach, and it's the little things that make such a big difference. You don't have to think it through and strategize it and logicize it. You just got to do stuff that you enjoy, and then next minute you realize that you picked up a couple of thousand people following you, and you're helping them all out around the world.
Yeah. So there's probably just one more, and I know, Mike, this is kind of really dear to your heart. We often talk about this word capitalism, right? And we know, I'm not going to charge this politically here, but I could. I'm not going to. But a lot of, and even just recently, I've found that I've been able to. There's a conversation going on about capitalism and how evil it is, and all that, particularly here in America right now, right? But the beauty of capitalism is that ability to create something that adds value to other people, right? And so, Mike, you've always had some very strong views on this in terms, and I'm not. I mean, you've got some strong political views as well, but and that's fine. But that's fine, brother. And but what I'm saying here is that you know, the business being a force for good, business being there to add value. For me, it's like I see the capacity to transform an economy one business at a time. Yeah. And small to medium companies being the energy, the drive that does that. Mike, just
yeah. So and I'll avoid the landmines that are all around us on this, because it's not. It is political, but it's really it's understanding how economics works, right? And so I actually prefer the term free enterprise to capitalism. I see capitalism as a subset of free enterprise, right. that where men and women are free to start, stop, create, act, take action, that's where all the good stuff happens. And so if you look at, you know, any country that did not have free enterprise, the Soviet Union is a great example. Whether they were communist or not, take that off the table, they did not have free enterprise. And so the creative gene went dormant, except really among the criminal element. And that's the fascination, because it was illegal to make profit and so on. So start with the premise that it's free enterprise, you know, and it's not capitalism. Capitalism as a subset is an economic theory that simply says you can work for your money, or you can get your money to work for you. It's just that simple, right? If I'm a wage laborer, you know, I'm only limited by two things. One is how much time I can work and how good I am, or how productive I am in my work. But there's nothing else I can do to rev that engine up. Capitalism is the opposite. It says don't trade your labor for value. That's a Marxist concept. What you want to do is you want to take whatever capital, whatever money you have, and you want to put it to work, whether it's earning interest in a bank or investing in somebody else's business, put it to work for you, and it repays you. That's capitalism. There's nothing evil about that whatsoever. No. The problem that we run into, and it's really it's accurate, but it's wrongly applied, is that somehow capitalism produces greed and socialism doesn't. We've all been to the former Soviet Union. Tell me the people there weren't greedy. They were totally greedy, right? Yeah, not any more or any less. In fact, some of the greediest people I've ever known were poor. And so when you say, well, so then it's not the system. It's not. It's the heart.
Yeah.
You know, and so what I think our battle, and this is where we come back to where you started, is business for good. Is we've got to rethink how we define that good. You know, I mean, financial profit, you have to have it. And by the way, in a capitalistic system, you have to have it to repay your investors. Yeah. That's part of it. But business also has the ability to bring social good.
Yes.
Through job creation, through being able to support, you know, social institutions. I mean, there's social good.
Being esteemed to people, all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And then there's an environmental piece, which no one ever talks about. You know, the fact that we have, I think business is the solution to the environmental problem. Yep. The government has failed. Every government has you know, there's some success stories, don't get me wrong, but has fundamentally failed in really remediating and protecting the environment. Business could do that if they really put their mind to it. And then I think there's a spiritual component as well. Yeah. That my whole life is better because of business. So I think I'm a stickler for defining terms, Jono. That's why I kind of went through the free enterprise versus
I knew you would. That's why I wanted to open that.
Yeah, so how capitalism actually works, the mechanics of capitalism in a free enterprise system, and then you really crown it with the dream. What are we really trying to do? Am I trying to get rich? Most people that are rich don't enjoy their riches. The people that have created wealth and use that wealth for good, they love life.
Oh yeah, I was going to say the ones that are enjoying their riches, you actually don't even know they're rich.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about,
which is the wrong word, but yeah,
absolutely. So we're talking about raising the sights when we think about the purpose of business. If I think that the purpose of business is for me to get rich, I'm looking at the world through a keyhole.
Yeah.
If I understand all the goodness that can come out of a successful business. I mean, we've seen it. All three of us have seen it around the world. When you give a guy a job, or you help him start a little business in Kyrgyzstan, where he's literally repackaging cooking oil, and purifying it. So that, I mean, it's just some little tiny business like that. He's better off. His community's better off. You see good coming out of it. And by the way, he does make money.
Yeah.
Which is all great.
Yeah. And I've seen this happening with companies. I've had some experience with a construction company actually based out of Holland or the Netherlands or whatever they're called these days. And I know they've just legally changed their name by deed poll, but the Dutch. And they were building wall panels. Mike, you might know this business, but they were building pre-built wall panels for housing. You know, like in Europe, very popular. They kind of arrive on site and the house is almost finished in a day. And what they decided to do is they decided to manufacture the product in Moldova, and between Kazakhstan and Russia there. Mm-hmm. And they decided to manufacture this product in Moldova. And the reason they did that, one, they picked up an old empty Soviet factory for a peppercorn that's massive and allows them to scale. But two, they were seeing a lot of Moldovan men coming to Western Europe to work, which was leaving the women and children at home. You talk about the underground element coming out of the former Soviet Union, of course, and that's now shifted a lot into the trafficking trade. Yeah. And so they said, well, if we can just simply build a factory here so 50 guys can stay at home 50 men can stay at home with their family, that changes the whole dynamic of the community that we're based in.
Absolutely.
That impacts, and we're seeing this now in some of the political stuff happening here. They're coming back and going, well, it's actually a breakdown in the family that's causing these problems, which is, ends up being generational. And so all of this coming out of a free enterprise decision. I can go and set up a factory in Moldova and be profitable, and they just ship all their products back to Holland. And sorry, Mark, you've got no sound, buddy. There you are.
All right, thank you. I was just going to say, we are supporting a charity.
You're very, very quiet. Sorry, Mark.
Got the charity we're supporting were based originally out of the Sunshine Coast. They moved up to Cambodia. It's actually called Free to Shine.
Yes.
And this is a charity along the lines exactly what Mike was talking about.
I know Free to Shine. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nikki Me created this, and the whole idea was to find jobs for the family so that the parents in these poor countries didn't need to sell their kids.
Yeah.
And break the economic cycle that came into people smuggling and trafficking and that whole sex trade.
Yeah. So to me, and you'd have to be pretty callous not to agree that this is some of the power of, you've got free enterprise. Let's call it free enterprise, but this is the power of being able to establish your own business, being able to really input into that economy, to that space, not just your own family. But I even just think about, like we look at a local pub in our town, Mike, or anything when it's closed, it's no longer able to sponsor sports facilities or high schools or things like that. Just the immediate impact. And a lot of these businesses, they don't just do it because they get their name on a board. They do it because they love to serve and they love to add value to the community that they're in. And I think this is the beauty of this game.
Well, and let me throw the little. I'll throw a tidbit out here, and I know I'm going to have to start winding down. And you guys probably too. When I say free enterprise, and this may shock you, Jono, Mark, you don't know me that well, but I do believe there is a place for a certain amount of governmental oversight. I don't think it is unbridled, absolutely free enterprise, because same reason, think about why do we have a police force?
Yeah.
Most people all over the world want to do right. As I said earlier, they want to raise their kids, they want to love their wives, their husbands, they want to be good neighbors, they want, that's what they want. But there is always an element that wants to lie, cheat, and steal.
Yeah.
And that's where government comes in, right? It is an institution of justice. So I'm not a radical free enterprise guy that says no government control whatsoever. However, and this is where I'll balance my own imbalanced statement. The corruption that we see in the business world exists in government too.
Yes.
And that's why you cannot have it controlled by government. And so, we just had a wonderful friend in South Africa named Audrey Dornebrecht, and she just recorded and put on our site in the free space a video on ethical capitalism. And it's just brilliant. And I would encourage listeners to go there. Go to thirdpath.com. It's right there, under courses, but it's a free one. And I mean, it was originally part of a course, and I told her, I said, no, we're going to put this out in the free zone. This is a message that people have got to hear. It's just so fantastic. And I think that's what I stand for. I stand for ethical capitalism and ethical life, right? I mean, that's where the joy is.
Yeah.
And it's not a tax. It's not a negative. It's actually an enhancer. You can actually do a lot better business when you're transparent and adding value and keeping your ethics in line. Everybody knows who you are, what you stand for. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful feeling, and business can be great. I think this is what you're referring to with the Elon Musk activity earlier. He just gets it. He says it. He does it. And, he's pretty genuine about some real big moonshots, and he's an amazing ability to deliver.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and on all of that, Mike, I know you've got a top of the hour deadline, but we probably should wrap this up anyway. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really, I always appreciate you. You know that, but we get to hang out and have the vibe of the thing going on all the time. So we'll have our wine and cheese some other day.
There's so much serenity.
Yeah. You have to go and watch The Castle, an Australian movie, to get about 3 or 4 of those references, particularly if you want to catch the vibe of the whole thing. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved this conversation. And I've seen you, you even in all your different journeys, I've seen you on, and predominantly, obviously, in corporate America, as far as I'm concerned, hanging out with you. There's always been that can-do attitude. And I think that just takes us back to where we started. We talked about the undertaking, getting in and actually doing something, looking at, well, what are the things? What are the barriers? What are the challenges? And then what externally, what's going on around me, and how do I view that differently, and how do I connect with that, and how do I add value to that so that I improve somebody else's journey, not just my own. So I know that's your heartbeat. I love hearing your stories every single time, even though we've hung out now for about 10 or 11 years. I'm sure you're sick of my stories, but thank you very much, Mark. It's been wonderful. Sorry you have to be stuck there in the French Alps. And I'm John O'Brake. It's Business in Bare Feet. We've had Mike Baer with us from Third Path, thirdpath.com. That's right.
Thirdpathinitiative.com.
Thirdpathinitiative.com. Third spelled THIRD. So go and have a look. And we look forward to seeing you on our next Fireside chat with an entrepreneur. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Enjoyed it.